Thanks for being here, everybody. My name is Seth Pringle. I'm the director of the Claremont Museum of Art. I'm very excited about this discussion, inspired by the exhibition of Julian Lucas, Happiness Pursued, Paradise Lost. This exhibition is supported by the Pasadena Art Alliance, so I want to recognize them for their making this happen. We wanted to do, well, we were talking to Julian about doing an exhibition, and as I was learning more about these different series that he's been working on in recent years, it made a lot of sense to me to position the exhibition in the semi-quincentennial of the United States of America, our 250th birthday, as his work deals with the Great Migration and ideas of home and being driven from home. I've been really intrigued by the phrase of happiness pursuit, or the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence, and what that means as a right, the right to pursue happiness. So that's kind of one of the things that I was thinking about as we organized this exhibition. That is, Julian's vision, and we were honored to be able to present it here at the museum. And I was excited to put together this panel to get some different voices, people whose expertise isn't necessarily in art as well. So I'm excited about that part of our discussion as well. We will save some time for questions and answers at the end. So save your questions for the end, and we'll get to you. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. Julian Lucas is a contemporary artist based in Claremont, whose aim is to challenge social norms through his photographs that range from fine art to photojournalism, always true to analog techniques. In 2005, he founded Mirrored Society, a photo bookstore cherishing a worldwide collection of the finest photobooks. In 2018, he launched Print Pomona Art Book Fair to host independent photo book publishers and sellers, later leading to the creation of the Pomonan, a digital platform for independent and censor-free journalism. Susan McWilliams Barndt is the William F. Podlick Distinguished Fellow in Government at Claremont McKenna College. She is the author of The American Road Trip and American Political Thought, 2018, and the editor of a political companion to James Baldwin, 2017. For her work, she has received the Graves Award in the Humanities, a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship, and the Jack Miller Center's Teaching Excellence Award in Higher Education. Lydia Sohn is a writer and United Methodist minister currently serving Pomona United Methodist Church. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, and Christian Century, among others. Her debut book, Here, A Spirituality of Staying in a Culture of Leaving, 2025, pushes back against our age of constant reinvention and the cultural message that we should do whatever it takes to get where we want to go. Reading personal narrative and spiritual reflection, Here inspires readers to both embrace and transform their circumstances through commitment and stability, in order that they might find a true contentment right where they are. She lives in Claremont, California with her husband and 3 children, just up the street from me. Kikesa Kimbwala is an artist and art administrator from Claremont, California, a graduate of fine arts and art history from Howard University. She developed a career in the arts through time at the Brooklyn Museum, Crystal Bridges, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and Pace Gallery, centering co-narration, inclusive interpretation, and art as a social and political mechanism. In February 2025, Kikesa founded the artist collective Here Lay a Home, exploring the intersections of conceptual art and social impact through site-specific intervention that prioritize interventions, that prioritize earthen materials, found objects, and community-engaged performance. In August of 2025, the collective mounted an eponymous exhibition at the Armory Center for the Arts in Pasadena, staging its second iteration of the Altadena Altervention series that brought together artists, ecologists, and archivists of color to amplify the conditions of Black and brown Altadena residents in the aftermath of the Eaton fires. Kikesa is currently a student at Claremont Graduate University, developing administrative frameworks for artist support and site-specific programming. She's also our museum manager here at the Claremont Lewis Museum of Art, and has an exhibition at the Claremont Chamber of Commerce that just opens tonight, right, for Art Walk. So perfect timing. When we leave here, head over to the Chamber of Commerce. So I want to first just ask everyone to just tell us a little bit about the work that you do. Julian, you want to get started?
Oh, that's right. Tell us about the work that you do. A lot of things that are things starting from social work. I worked in corrections. I was a guard in the correctional field. Worked in group homes. So most of my career has been in social services. And so I think that poured over to my photographic work. Although I did see, when I first actually became serious, I started photography in high school, but like I mentioned before, back in the 90s, there wasn't supervision, so there was a dark room and there was girls. Other than that, social work pours into the work. When I started to get serious, I stumbled across a book, a Herb Ritz book in Portland Library. I went to school at Portland State. And so I just kind of 22 years old, I'm like, whoa, this is cool. Like, news that aren't like pornographic, And so, but it's Herb Ritz. I don't know if you don't know who he is, he's a fashion photographer, but he's not a fashion photographer that utilizes the studio. He did utilize nature. And so I was inspired by that, and then moved on to street work, street photography, and that sort of thing.
Can you give us the quick summary of the exhibition too? And
yeah.
For people who haven't, new to the show.
So, we always say in the photography world, everything's been done. But I did some research and I noticed that there was the Great Migration from Black people moving from the South to the North. Chicago, where I'm from. Actually, on my dad's side, we're from Mississippi, Greenville, Mississippi, to Chicago. And then my mom, she moved here to California. And so there wasn't any history really of Black people moving from the inner city, LA, to the suburbs, to east or north, to Pomona and Lancaster, that sort of thing. There wasn't really much history in that. And so what I wanted to do was create this body of work that documents people that live out here in the suburb. So I started researching, and actually Pamela, who's in the audience, Naylor, she sent me links and things like that of like the Great Migration, and then also how the suburbs were created with the New Deal. Franklin, Roosevelt Franklin.
Franklin.
Yeah, Franklin Roosevelt. Two first names. Not two last names. But, yeah. And so, I didn't know that. My dad was a Korean War veteran, so I don't believe he got the GI Bill. So, yeah. So anyways, I did the work here, and then I incorporated the installation of what I remember my home to be in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. Yeah.
Lydia, you
Sure. I put this down here because I think my mic was causing a little bit of feedback, so we'll see if I put it back here. I'm a minister, like Seth mentioned, and like Julian mentioned, a lot of thankless labor as a mom of 3. You don't get a lot of thanks from little children, do you? But it's so gratifying on the good days. And also on the good days, I like to think about what makes the most fulfilling, rich life. And my parents immigrated from Korea in search of that rich, good life. And they moved like every couple of years in order to pursue it. And it wasn't until my adult years that I started to think that maybe that they had it the reverse, that maybe fulfillment and happiness could be achieved by staying put and putting down roots, you know, like the image of a tree. And so that has been a lot of my spirituality and work and writing, which gave birth to the book that I wrote. And then I practiced that in my own spirituality and, of course, with my family. And I was excited to be here and invited to contribute to this talk on home.
Hi, I am a political scientist and I study American political thought. But when I say political thought, I'm not talking about what most people think of when they think of politics. You know, Republicans, Democrats, like the issues that we talk about when we tend to talk about politics conventionally. I'm talking about the structures of ordinary existence and how they shape how we think about our duties to each other, our connections to each other, our relationships to each other, and to the world around us. And that general interest, which moves in a lot of different directions, took me a few years ago, as Seth said, to write a book about roads and road trip stories in the American imagination. Because I believe that most of American life has been imagined or enacted or conceptualized on roads, which I take to be our signature public space. Roads being this place that are emblematic of the idea of freedom and mobility, but also of exile and displacement and disconnection. So I was so excited to be asked to participate on this panel because it really, the exhibit touches on so many of the things I'm interested in. And I think we're all interested in, which is what I take to be some of the underlying tragedy enacted in American life over and over and over again, where the act of home seeking and the search for home is simultaneously an act of estrangement and displacement. And I think this exhibit really for me is, Seth and I were saying, it's such a great 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence exhibit, because I think it really touches on something that for all of us gets at the heart of what it has meant to be an American.
Hi everyone. As Seth mentioned, I'm an artist, trained as an artist and art historian, also just cultural worker, so learning how to support artists in a very kind of expansive way. I'm also really interested in how to facilitate really meaningful engagements and connections with art, which I get to practice here at the museum, through our exhibitions and through programs like this. My creative practice has really developed in the last 2 years in direct relationship to the Eaton fires. my family and my mom, who's in the back, being raised in Altadena, and her family history really rooted in the constructing of the 10 and 210 freeways, the way that that brought Mexican migrants into the United States in the 1920s, and then, as Susan mentioned, these American histories around homemaking and then displacement with repatriation in the Altadena and Pasadena area that then forced Mexican migrants who had become native to Altadena, pushed them back out of this country, which we see these cycles replay themselves into today. So really my practice has evolved to engage with those types of histories in memory making. I've been really lucky in the past year to engage with friends in different parts of cultural work, so engaged with the environment, engaged with history and archive stewardship, and thinking about place and how we use, or I'm really interested in how to use a conceptual practice to talk about those issues and actually affect physical infrastructure. How we pull on these ideas to really create place and home and stability for folks, specifically Black and brown folks in Southern California, just because this is my home.
Yes, I don't think I mentioned specifically the theme of the panel. It's titled "American Dreams of Home." So it's how does the ideas of home and the American dream kind of intersect? And one of the interesting things I think about this exhibition and this conversation is, the coexistence of like these historical or national or even international ideas with the individual and the present. With that in mind, I'm just asking everyone to share what is your most vivid, one of your most vivid memories of home. How are you define home? To kind of just give a little taste of that personal side of the story. We can mix it up in sequence. Kikesa, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure.
Sorry, can you show your microphone is on?
Can we
Hold it at a distance. There you go.
So a vivid memory of home that comes to mind and how I define home. I was born in Pomona, so our neighboring city, and only stayed till I was about 6 or 7 years old before moving further inland towards the Galino-Sayucaipa area. So stuck around not too far, but really a vivid memory of home that I call upon, specifically in my painting practice, is our little house in Pomona up the street from the hospital. I remember the color, that's kind of the image that comes to mind. So this purple, maroon, burgundy. There was an afternoon where I think that my mom and I were laying a stone path out between the sidewalk and the house. And just the effort and labor of placing those, even at that time, I was really particular in making sure that they lined right. So I remember that action, connecting our home and just the intimacy of that space to the greater world around me, out to the sidewalk and into the city. It's funny because that memory really informs the work that I make in just color palette alone. I think a lot about home is so much kept in memory, and I see this kind of purple haze of childhood that comes directly from that house, which is funny.
When I think of home, I think of my father telling me stories and that you ended on the note of memories, I think is where my mind went. In part because I grew up in New Jersey, but the child of someone from Los Angeles County who was forever sad to be displaced from Los Angeles County. And he himself was the child of someone from Colorado who was his whole life sad to have been displaced from Colorado. And I sometimes think that I ended up in Southern California enacting my own kind of displacement to try to make some kind of circle whole, because so much of my experience of growing up was hearing these stories of people who had lost things. And I think I came to understand that home is something that is very fragile and that you have to fight to preserve.
For me, home is 5 senses. It smells, barbecue, backyard parties, music, food. I just mentioned barbecue, but food like Chicago, I remember fried green tomatoes, pig's feet, collard greens, ribs, shrimp and ribs, perch dinners, and then California, tacos, pupusas, and more tacos. As far as sight, Chicago, the elevated train going down 63rd Street. My dad taking my sister and I to the pool room where he gambled. My mom calling on the payphone, yelling at a customer. Why I got my kids? Yeah, and then Portland, older hipsters, OG hipsters. Hipsters that didn't have money. Hipster food, that sort of thing. The rain, that's all.
Well, Susan, I think it's interesting because your work is a lot about the roads, and I once told my parents, because they moved quite a bit, and they also worked a lot, you know, like classic Korean immigrant parents who came to the United States really poor and were pursuit of the American dream. And so they worked about like 60 hours a week, and we never saw them. So the times that we would actually get to hang out with our parents was on like particular weekends when they decided that we should go to the beach or like take a weekend trip. And that's when I would get to talk to them and share with them like what was going on in school and my dreams, my fears. So I once told them that the place where I felt safest was in the car, when we were always like moving, which is interesting because at that time I also didn't know how to articulate that my parents were always like moving homes and cities too. So the car was like a place that felt so comfortable for me because I had their full attention and our family was together. But another home that's significant for me is probably the church. You know, most Koreans who immigrated in the 1980s, they, were displaced, and so they found home at the Korean American Evangelical Church, where we got to eat our Korean food every week, right? Where we got to see people that looked like us every week if we were going to schools where with kids that didn't look like us. And so even though we moved cities quite a bit, we always found a church home that was usually Korean American.
So now on to, the American dream. Zoom out to that. I just learned the term American dreamism in this book I'm reading. I thought it was an interesting way of kind of framing it. But according to, I think I got this from Encyclopedia Britannica, the term American dream was coined by James Truslow Adams in 1931. He wrote a book called The Epic of America. And he defined it as not a dream of motor cars and high wages merely, but a dream of a social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain the fullest stature of which they are innately capable and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position. So just kind of an open question about like what are your feelings about the American dream, and then also how does it relate to your work? You want to start with this then?
Sure. Is that me? I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly what motivated my parents to move here, is they were of the lower class in South Korea at the time. Social mobility was that didn't exist, right? Like you grew up in a poor family, you didn't be poor for life. And so they saw America as this like place where they could break out of this rigid caste system, and they did very quickly. So my mom pursued pharmacy school, then became a pharmacist, and that kind of shot us from one class to the next class. And when my dad got educated here, and then received his PhD, his doctorate, and so that was very much seen in one lifetime for me. But then, of course, because of their language barrier and our race, I also got to witness as an immigrant the glass ceiling, right, and the myth of the American dream. Of like, okay, like we definitely moved a lot further than they could have in Korea, but there's always like limitations that they kept running into, positions that they could never get, right, or even when my mom was a pharmacist. So many times like customers, like when she would work at Rite Aid, or like other big pharmaceutical companies, just be like, go back to your country because I can't understand you, right? So like, there is this mobility, and at the same time, this glass ceiling that they kept hitting up against. And the reality of that with the mobility is always interesting. An interesting tension for me to witness, even for me now.
Okay. The American dream. Well, that wasn't for me. That wasn't for, like I mentioned, I don't believe my dad got the
GI Bill.
GI Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just wasn't for black people. And then civil rights. After civil rights, it was mass incarceration. And I was actually trying to make that I was arrested in 1992 for petty, like resisting arrest and trespassing. So they tried to get me in the system, but I paid their little fine, and that was it. I moved to Portland for school. But the American dream, I think I feel like that's a construct. It's people, I don't feel like people are satisfied, and I feel like for us as humans, we're not satisfied. And so we're always searching, which is a good thing. It doesn't have to be that. My dad wasn't educated. He didn't finish high school. My mom, she has her master's. They both come from two different generations. My dad's silent generation. My mom was baby boomer generation. And so my dad didn't understand school, youth education. But my mom did. She pushed my sister and I. But of course I didn't listen until later in life. I'm actually graduating next week with my master's. And so 52 years old, master's degree. So, yeah, that's it.
You mentioned the GI Bill, and I didn't know until a few years ago, learned about the access to the GI Bill was racist largely in terms of just who was able to access those. And I've been thinking a lot about how that influences Claremont. As a college town, and a lot of the artists, amazing artists that we celebrate through this museum. We're able to attend the Claremont colleges because of the GI Bill, and a lot of those artists. There we go. A lot of those artists were able to get the teaching jobs in the Claremont colleges, and so there there's generational kind of implications of that discrimination, and very pertinent to this museum and this city. Okay, I'll stop talking and let you guys talk more. Susan?
I guess when I think about the American dream, I think about two things. One is the fact that this nation is distinctive in taking as a founding document a statement of a radical moral proposition that all men are created equal. A statement that we can all agree the nation has never lived up to in practice. What that means for American experience is that the experience of American political life is one consistently of disappointment, and a consistent feeling like we have failed to become who we say we are or who we want to be. It raises questions like, do we even really want to be who we say we want to be? And so for me, the first half of my thinking about American dream is influenced by that huge gap, the perpetual gap between our ideals and our institutions. That has always been there, and that to the extent ideals are ideals, will always be there. The second thing that I think about when I think about the American dream is that, when Gallup used to do, I don't know if they still do, but I mean very recently, they used to do surveys of Americans about what you value. Right? And what was fascinating about those survey results is what Americans say they value the most are things that are almost entirely incompatible with each other. Right? So 95% of Americans would say what I want more than anything else in the world is independence. But then the equal number of Americans would be like, well, I also want more than anything else in the world, love, right? And you get similar metrics for I want stability and adventure. I want mobility, and I want home, stable home. And so one of the things, the American dream is such a vague phrase, and I think for some people it does mean class mobility, and for other people it means a strong, stable community. And part of what I think confuses our national conversation is both that it's tragic to want these two incompatible things, that we all understand why you would want both things, but you can't have both, at least not all the time. But it also means that we're often circling slightly different things. And so often I think that what we talk about, what we think we want when we say we talk about the American dream, when we want to achieve the American dream, is not actually what people want all the way down. So in the big picture, when I think American dream, I think gap between ideals and institutions, and also a kind of national incoherence about what it is that we're actually dreaming of.
I love what you're speaking to. I love what you're speaking to in terms of the American dream and American contradiction at a very individual and kind of principle and ideal level, but also at a historical scale. When we talk about the foundations of a lot of folks' experience and grounds here in the United States as home. With, of course, the legacy of enslavement in the land of the free, And I also think that we're all pulling our reference for the American dream as something intergenerational, or informed by the way that our parents and their parents believed in that dream and invested in it and pursued, and that we are a product of that. So I think about that a lot, and I think about that in the work that I've been doing around the idea of home. And my references have to be of generations past, where the American dream meant something tangible. It meant the idea of the job and the house and the kids and opportunities for your kids and stability and grounding. And speaking from a younger generation, I think that we've seen those fabrics dissolve. And we look to the labor that building the house required. So now it's keeping the house, and that continuing to be a pursuit, and something that feels like it's always slipping through your fingers. So for me, the American dream is very much in the present. It's an American myth making, and trying to piece that puzzle back together. I do think that it's helpful to look at what the American dream, the ways in which that was accomplished in the past, and I want to share a story that I was able to uncover through talking to folks in Altadena and reflection on their American dream. So one of the families whose stories I'm working to record and archive are the Hines family, who they live here in Claremont, but originally had a home in Altadena that was lost last year during the fires. And speaking with them, so David Hines went to high school here in Claremont. His grandmother lived in Altadena in their home, but she was one generation from enslavement. So her parents before her had been enslaved in Arkansas, and after emancipation, opened a small store. So I can get deeper into that personal history. They sold their store to Piggly Wiggly, and with that money were able to drive cross country to California and make home in Altadena. And picturing that, just that transition, what that required, the imagination that required, and the optimism and the will, that is the accomplishing of an American dream, because it's something that was not supposed to be possible. So that's where I'm able to physically ground an American dream, and I think for me in the present, that's what we hope to pull back and recover.
So as I've been thinking about the American dream, this myth of the American dream for this conversation, it was dawning on me about how it's always framed from an individual standpoint. It's often about, like the self-made man, is able to get rich and buy an island and be free from social obligation, or you're just being able to do whatever you want, right? So I was thinking about, what if the individual liberty gave us the freedom to pursue social obligation rather than flee it? So, what does an American dream look like from a collective standpoint rather than an individual standpoint, potentially? Susan, do you want to start us off on this one?
Yeah, I think it's beyond question that the dominant mode of thinking about liberty in the United States has been like this Anglo-centric individual liberty, pursue your own American dream, like you do you, right? Like that's a quintessential American idea. Part of why I really love the title of this exhibit and Julian's Exodus series is that I'm interested in countervailing traditions of thinking about liberty that have also existed in the United States side by side with that Anglo-philosophical individual liberty tradition, particularly the Exodus tradition in American politics. Few people know how important Exodus was to the founders. In fact, the day they signed the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin agreed that the Great Seal of the United States, like that would show what the Declaration was about, should show pictures from the Exodus story in the Hebrew Bible. They got in a big fight over what that picture should be. That's why that's not what a Great Seal looks like. But those founders, at least, were really thinking collectively, because the Exodus story, as I hope you all know, is a story about collective liberation. It's about a people discovering freedom through their ability to collectively self-govern and care for each other under excruciatingly difficult survival circumstances. But nowhere in American political thought is the Exodus story been more important than in Black political thought. The Exodus story is absolutely the central reference point for Black political thought, starting with people like the early AME Church and people like Lemuel Haynes, who's absolutely the most forgotten of American founders, but was the first Black minister in the United States of a predominantly white congregation. Pretty much every major thinker in the Black literary and political tradition has at least riffed on the Exodus theme. And so I think there is actually a rich tradition in American political thought of thinking about freedom as a collective project and a community project, or as a community building project. But I do think it's eclipsed and buried and overlooked. And it's not really part of our national self-understanding, though it absolutely should be. And sometimes against those people, at least in my line of work, who say, well, the American tradition is individual liberty, so we either have to stick with that or we have to overthrow it for some other vision. I hope that maybe the next 250 years are ones in which we recover alternative ways of thinking about liberty in American politics and culture, because I do think they're there. I think they're there in immigrant literature. I think they're there in Black political thought. I think they're there in a lot of art and culture, and even in weird things like the popularity of the Harry Potter book series, which is all about how we need each other to come together to fight forces of evil and of technological mastery and other kinds of forces that are threatening to tear us apart in the name of our own quote-unquote liberation.
Oh my gosh, where do I start? Okay, so I think it's, I feel like, and I don't know if it's just because I'm in these social circles and reading, the material that I'm drawn to, but there's so much research that's showing that money and success and climbing the social ladder isn't ultimately what gives people happiness. That after a certain threshold, that it ceases to matter. Now there's been a lot of disagreement and pushback against that kind of literature, but there's all the studies on happiness show that it's really community that is the biggest contributing factor for people's happiness. Feeling tied to a community, whether that's your neighborhood or a church or a group of friends or the school PTA or an artist group or whatever. And I don't know if, we all know Robert Putnam's great book, Bowling Alone, that since the 1960s and since the urban suburban expansion, community and feeling cohesive has been disintegrating since the 1960s. But I see it I feel like though at the same time there's like this growing consciousness that money isn't what buys us happiness, and climbing the social ladder and like career. I feel like Americans are over like getting the best job. Am I wrong about that? I don't know. But I think everyone would have a different answer for that. But we just all want to be more happy, and we're recognizing that it's our community and a sense of belonging that makes people most happy. So I hope that can contribute to this feeling of like, well, let's make sure that home isn't just for me, but home is for everyone that wants to live here.
Yeah, I'm thinking specifically about liberty and the collective, and what's coming to mind is really liberation movements, and a movement is a collecting of people, right? Collective liberation. Liberation can't be achieved individually, and we live in the United States. We live in a very kind of individual and alienating culture that doesn't lend itself to liberation. When we look at liberation on a small scale, really the way that communities respond to crisis, so again, using the Eid fires as a really recent example, and one that's close to all of us. It's 40, 50 minutes from where we're seated now. A lot of the big question after the fires was, how can we help? From people in the peripheries, like where we are in Claremont and Pomona and the Inland Empire. And in trying to find solutions to these very specific problems of immediate displacement and housing crisis, which LA has always experienced, but has been proliferated by recent events. It was so interesting how our reference points became, what did temporary shelters look like in other places around the world where people were experiencing environmental displacement or displacement by conflict. A lot of folks in Altadena were seeing themselves as climate refugees, which was a very new truth, and looking to solutions that were being practiced by Palestinian refugees and in the global south, in South America and through Sudan, and my family fleeing the Democratic Republic of Congo as political refugees. It was so interesting how we were trying to look for solutions close to home and finding those solutions everywhere. And that speaks to a truth that we recognize, but I think we often overlook and don't really sit with, which is that these struggles are shared, and the solutions are shared as well. We have to look to one another, lean on one another, because as much as our individual struggles are profound, they're not unique, and they are shared. So, and it's just a matter of building that doing that connecting. Yeah.
I just want to piggyback on the collective. Like you mentioned, it's diminishing. Like I remember block parties.
Yeah, there's no more block parties.
Yeah, and so now everybody just stays to themselves, and nobody knows their neighbors. It's weird, right? Because that's not what I remember growing up. Sharing food, somebody either barbecued or baked something. That's all slim to none at this point. So, yeah.
I was just thinking when I went bowling recently that it's not just that we're bowling alone, now we're bowling alone from an app on our phone. So, Lydia, do you want to share how we met through the flyer you left in my mailbox? Speaking of like block parties and
we moved into our own home, which was our American dream. We didn't think that this was going to be possible, with the housing market the way that it is. And really welcomed us into our new home. And so we threw ourselves our own welcome to the neighborhood party. And we threw an ice cream social. We bought a ton of different ice cream cones from Costco, put them in an ice chest. My kids on their bikes and scooters delivered flyers to every house on our street that said come and meet us and you'll get an ice cream cone. And it was so lovely. So many people came out from our street, and the craziest thing was people met each other for the first time who lived a few houses down from each other and had been living for a decade at the house. Oh, I live on 425. Oh, I live on 451. That's so crazy. How long have you been living here? Oh, 10 years. How long have you been living here? 12 years. And so that, I think it's just up to us, to initiate, because everyone was so enthusiastic and hungry for this connection. But we're afraid to start it because we think that they don't want it. Mm-hmm. So we kind of co-hosted with my neighbor, and she's like, nobody's gonna come. And I'm like, no, everybody's gonna come. And they did.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us and giving us free ice cream on the theme of home and connection to place. So, Julian, can you talk more about just kind of the tension between home and displacement in your Exodus series, and maybe specifically about the works that we're looking at in this room?
Yeah. Sorry. So, the images that you see, the lady in front of the wreckage from Altadena, that's from the Altadena fire, and that was maybe a week after the fire. And that photograph was just a fluke. I was walking around just photographing the aftermath, and she happened to be there. And that's actually her house there. That's some of what's left. And actually incorporated this into the series. The couple here, that's also on the banner outside, they lost their house, but they're right now in the process of rebuilding. And next door was their his father-in-law, who had lost his house as well, right next door. Yeah. And then that's my mom there in front of the house. And Karina, the house I kind of grew up in my high school years. And then that's a couple from Pomona. That's a house in Pomona. And then the little kid on the piano is Ontario. So I documented this lady's Walnut, and then this lady here is in Rancho. So yeah, it's an ongoing series. It doesn't stop at the images here on the wall. There's actually more images. It's just an ongoing series. Yeah. And so, yeah. What was it?
Yeah. That's fine. And so Kikesa with Kirlea Home, organizing art exhibitions around the Eden Fire. What have you learned about the role of art in connection to place, loss, and healing?
So here at home, and before it became a formal exhibition at the Armory, which we were really grateful for. The way that it came to be was that someone who was displaced by the fires and living right at the bottom, so North Pasadena, so right touching the edge of Altadena, but was also, moved out of her home because of the fires. And she invited us to create a full-scale exhibition of what originally was really just a gathering of friends to sit and talk about the loss in the months that followed. So maybe the fires were in January, and our first iteration of what we called the Altadena Altervention, because we approached it as altar making, a space to grieve and lay memories in a place for loss, and doing that together. It was really sitting out in grass and just recording stories of home, whether it was home in Altadena or home elsewhere, and then coming to California, just what that meant and what it means to lose that and what it means to make that, doing that imagining work and doing that together. We were really lucky in that process to find that we all came from different perspectives and with different skills. So interest in environment and California ecology specifically, and plants that actually thrive after fire. Using those as reference points to think about renewal and rebuilding. Friends who worked in engineering, and so they had that physical architectural thinking around, okay, what would rebuilding look like? And friends who were specifically working in kind of community organizing and archiving, like looking at our elders and looking at the histories of, well, how have people remade from what was lost previously, and what's really important in that process. That's where the memory keeping and storing really became essential, and home became something less tangible, less physical, and it became all of the ephemeral elements. So the senses, the five senses that you're thinking about, the smell of home, even going into the second gallery and into Julian's living room installation. And I'm so lucky to get to be in the museum and experience that space with visitors. As soon as they walk into this dimly lit room and they see the wood paneling on the walls and kind of the warmth of the lamps, they're immediately transported to home. So it's that kind of sensory experience as well. And you realize how much of home is in the memory making and keeping. I really like talking about the works on these walls, and not just your photography practice, but your photo practice as an object making and a decision to keep and hold memory. So, I think that I've learned through the process, and only through working creatively and imagining with others, that home is it's the stream and patchwork that's patchworked together. And because of that, you become really optimistic in the ways that you can find that anywhere, and with people who are close and believe in the same thing.
I was actually thinking, yes, okay, so, because you use the term ephemeral, and I was thinking about how you were sharing how you interviewed a family that was just one generation away from slavery, and they pursued their American dream by buying their first house in Altadena, and then of course little did they know that their home would be swallowed up by the fires, right? So as a minister, of course, bring a spiritual perspective to all of this. I see it as that I think that sociologically and psychologically, we are happiest when we are rooted to a community and a place. That as physical beings with physical senses, that we seek a home, but ultimately we need to root ourselves in something deeper. Because the home can be burned out in any given moment, right? So you were talking about home ultimately being ephemeral. And so you feel a home, and like when I meet another Korean American, it's like, oh, I feel like home, I just met you, like I know you, you know? And so it's rooting the home inside our souls in something a little bit deeper. Although I do think that the tangible home is a justice issue as well. So in spirituality, we talk about creating, our work is to create a heaven on earth for folks. So including those who aren't included, creating spaces for everyone where they feel safe. And so even though our ultimate home is obviously not here, and I'm like going through a midlife crisis of how fast time seems to be ticking, that like just noticing how fast time is ticking and knowing that my ultimate home is somewhere else and that we're passing by this earth momentarily, that it's not just a, well, whatever, like let's just like live how I want to live, you know, because I'm here just temporarily. But the task, as I see it, is to create a heaven on earth for everybody.
I've also been thinking, you know, a lot about just the definition of home, and it wasn't that long ago that I first heard the term unhoused being used, and my first reaction was like, I've just gotten, I feel like everybody's always trying to come up with a new terminology all the time, you know, like have the new way of saying the same thing, but then I was like, oh no, wait, like just because you don't have, you don't currently have, a place to stay, doesn't mean you don't have a home, right? Whether it's like, connection to a smell or, it's something I've been thinking about in terms of that definition. So Susan, in your exhibition essay that you wrote for this show, you talk about the relationship between freedom and being tethered, which seems like kind of an unintuitive connection. You want to talk about that?
Sure, it's definitely not intuitive to Americans to think in that term. Let me tell you what I meant and then why I think it's not intuitive to Americans. I think everybody in this room can probably think of someone who they feel or have felt deeply at home with.
Mm-hmm.
And what's that experience like? When somebody who you know or have known for a long time, or maybe you just hit off the bat and you feel like this person understands you and you feel recognized and you feel like you could say this, be the stupid version of you or the mean version of you or the crazy version of you, and that person would be okay with it, right? Or they would see the bigger picture. And to me, those what we say when we say we feel at home with someone is kind of like the most profound feeling of freedom that we can feel, which is like I can be my full self and still be recognized and loved. And that is, and that's what I mean when I say that sometimes you feel most free when you're tethered or connected or in relation to some kind of full recognition of who you are. So for me, freedom and love are closer than most Americans take them to be. James Baldwin says, and I think this is right, that most Americans have inherited our understanding of freedom from the early opposition in this country between freedom and slavery. And so what Baldwin says is when most Americans say freedom, what they really mean is mastery. And what we think we're chasing, what we think freedom is like, I can kind of do whatever I want and other people can minister to me on my terms. I can go onto my machine and press a few buttons and some unknown like labor force will pull together and drop a chicken sandwich at my front door, and I will be under no obligation to that person or group of people. I'm a free person. Baldwin would have us say, like, is that really an experience of freedom, or is that just feeling like a kind of latter-day master? And so, and it's not relational, it gives you really nothing except a chicken sandwich, right? Like, you're not, and so I think that Americans have understood, sort of the evolving, Americans have understood this way of understanding what freedom is, again, as very individual, as things happening like on my terms, but ultimately, like, those kinds of interactions aren't nearly as satisfying as being at home with someone. And I've been struck too by like the loneliness epidemic and thinking about how, just compare, if you can compare different kinds of like experiences, what makes you feel safer and freer and more grounded? You need 2 eggs. So you go to your next door neighbor's house and they give you 2 eggs with no expectation that you give them $3 in exchange. Or that you get on Uber Eats and you pay like $25 for someone you'll never see to drop off like a dozen eggs, which is 9 more eggs, 10 more eggs than you need on your front porch, and you never interact with that person again, right? Like, either way you can end up with the eggs, but like, to me, a free society looks like the first set of relationships and exchanges. And like, I don't know what I call them that other kind, it's a version of freedom, but I don't think it's actually the kind of freedom that's profound and enduring and productive of like a really healthy society.
There was actually just a New York Times piece on how to build community when people are so lonely, and the first tip was ask them for favors. You know, like, oh, can you watch my kid for a little bit while I go to the doctor? You know, like, this is the last minute thing, and I would never think to do that because I hate imposing. But now, Seth, I'm just going to come to your door and ask you for
I do tell my students that there's similar research that says the best way to make yourself attractive to another human being is to ask them for help.
Yes.
Which we want to ask them to do something, but people love to be asked to help. People want to come together. People want. I always think that one of the most tragic moments in American life was after September 11th, when people were dying to do things. Like, people were lining up at blood banks all over the nation. And the president at that time was asked, well, what can ordinary Americans do? And he said, hug your kids and go to the mall, right? And it was this absolutely like bloodless. People wanted to help other people. People want to be needed. And that's at the root of, I think, like so much of what we're talking about today. And we're very bad as Americans at recognizing that in ourselves and in each other.
Yes, asking for help.
One of my favorite things is being asked for directions and knowing what the answer is. Just a stranger pulls up in their car. Yes, I can help you. So Lydia, kind of on the theme of your book, which again the title, I love the title of A Spirit Here, a spirituality of staying and a culture of leaving. My question is, what can be gained by staying and what can be lost by leaving?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think I've been referencing it all throughout what I've been sharing, is that when we uproot ourselves from our communities and relationships, our career trajectories prematurely, that we're always on the search and the hunt, always thinking that the grass is greener on the other side. And I still have this, and that is not true. The grass is never greener, right? We grow the grass. We're in Southern California, we grow the sage, right? Whatever native plant we love. At the same time, I want to be very conscious about staying can feel like a trap for people who are in communities or in relationships where they don't flourish. So I always say the test is, right, are you rooted in a place with the capacity to flourish, right? If you are, then maybe your constant desire to move has to do with wanderlust and envy, right? And dig deeper into where you find yourself, because in every home, every relationship, it's ever renewing, it's infinitely renewing. Even though we think that they get stale. yeah, and to just always question. And I think that too, for my own discernment in terms of figuring out whether to stay or to leave, is like, because I have left jobs and relationships and communities, and sometimes good and not so good, and it's only in retrospect that we get to figure out what felt better and how things turned out. And the litmus test that I give to people is, when you have this desire to leave, whatever you want to leave, does it feel like you're escaping? Or does it feel like, oh, that time has come to its completion and I'm being invited to the next thing? Now, for some, for our survival, escaping is a good thing, right? I'm thinking about refugees, people in abusive relationships, right? But if it's not like that, but for the rest of us who seem to be in pretty okay situations, and we have this like inkling of like wanting to leave or ready for the next thing, to ask ourselves the question, am I escaping something? Am I escaping with like looking in the mirror, figuring things out, like digging through the trenches, growing, right? Whatever that looks like for you. Or has this come to its full completion and I'm now ready and I'm being invited to the next thing? And it just feels good. It feels good to start the next chapter with that different energy.
All right, we're going to open it up to questions, comments from the audience. Andy, you ready to go?
Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations with Julian about, we've talked about home ownership, redlining, sunset towns, Southern California history, real estate covenants, and these have covered Claremont and Pomona, and certainly Altadena was formed because people who were refused every place else went to Altadena, and then made it a kind of paradise, which is just a beautiful story. But anyway, I'd like to hear Julian kind of talk about this, because he's looked at all these maps, and he's, we've talked about it at great length. I think that's that kind of obstacle, like talking about the GI Bill, I think that talking about that kind of obstacle is really important to insert in this conversation. Go, Julian.
So as far as like redlining, I spoke earlier, my dad left Mississippi and moved to the north, in Chicago. But at the time, blacks were they can only live on the south side of Chicago because of redlining. And then as far as California, most areas here redline and yellow line. I know Pomona was redline, Ganesha Hills, Claremont, Covina, where I grew up, Inglewood, Watts. There's an interesting movie. It's kind of scary. Actually, it's really scary. It's called Them. I don't know if people are familiar with it. Okay. So, yeah, in that movie, it talks about redlining through the stories, the different chapters.
Could you say more about redlining for those of us who don't know?
So redlining is, there are like racist housing covenants. So Ganesha Hills, I actually have a copy of a covenant for Ganesha Hills. And it says that no blacks or people of Latin culture, Asiatic, kind of weird, that term, Asiatic, couldn't live in Ganesha Hills. And this was 1954. Yeah. So, yeah, as far as that's redlining.
Like a line you can't cross.
Yes.
There's actual maps that were drawn by real estate banks, and then the lumping. like if you bought in that area, like it wasn't worth anything. Yeah.
You couldn't sell. I was raised in Florida,
Okay.
and my mother bought a house in Orlando in 1927, or bought a lot, and you couldn't sell
Right.
other to a person that was white.
Right.
And then I had a friend in Whittier that was Asian, and one of the bankers loaned her money for a house, and she had never forgotten and most gracious to him. And he lived to be
Right.
90 years old.
There was actually an interesting story a couple of years back where the Leimert Park District in LA off Crenshaw, there was a mall that was for sale, and I know that the black community raised like over the asking price for the mall, and they didn't want to sell it to black people, and they sold it to a lower bidder. That was not black. So I think that was pretty interesting, to trying to change that area of the park.
I think that story also gets into how the pursuit of like ownership
Right.
doesn't liberate.
Right.
Kikesa, do you want to talk about some of the things, like in the Altadena, some of those family histories that I think are in your essay, had to do with, kind of those legal connections to property and whatnot?
Yeah, so and really these histories for me come from talking to people. So whether it be like my family and my aunts and or from friends who are then sitting down with their parents and their grandparents and the stories that are revealed. It's super interesting to look at Altadena as a microcosm for all of these different political and social events that really shaped California culture as a whole. And this place meant to be kind of its own haven of diversity, of multiculturalism. So it's really interesting to look at Altadena and see examples such as the Hines family, who I previously mentioned. So really early example of Black home ownership in California. Their family told me a story about how, and just thinking about this home that was lost and 5 generations of their family that passed through it. And they saw the way that the Great Depression robbed a lot of folks of the stability that they created, whether it be through jobs and through property. And it was, even as the family lost their jobs and their income and the things that they'd worked hard to build, it was really the home that has its own stability and equity. That's what got them through the Great Depression. They remember storing the personal objects of their Japanese neighbors in their garage during Japanese internment in California. So when their neighbors were taken, and that history of really displacement but abductions, how that their home became a place to protect their neighbors and wait for their return. I mentioned repatriation and the way that impacted Mexican Americans, who we know make up the fabric of California in so many different ways, and looking at the way that Mexicans and Mexican Americans are experiencing really oppressive migration policy now. It feels so unprecedented. It feels unprecedented. But to know that there were Mexican Americans who were born in this country were removed en masse during the 1930s and 40s. sent to Mexico, and then made their way back in the next generation. And all of that happening in Altadena, they're so histories worth digging into because they lived in that place and they live in that place, but they also are a reflection of what was happening in California as a whole and throughout this country. So it's really interesting to pull out those threads and discover and see them so close. See them, continue to exist so close to us. Those histories aren't far.
Any other questions from the audience? All right. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. That was amazing. And thank you all for coming here. And don't forget to check out Kikesa's show at the Chamber of Commerce. And enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.